Hey everybody, today I am going to give you a rundown on scholarship of teaching and learning, and it's particularly focused on this for STEM faculty, but much of what I have to say in the info kind of will apply across campus. So stay tuned. If you're not STEM, I still have some useful info for you. And to help give you the information on SoTL, I interviewed 6 different people from universities across the US and actually Canada that are active in SoTL and at different stages of their careers. So I started with Janice Miller-Young from the University of Alberta. She's our Canadian. And then I also interviewed Steve Freeman from Iowa State University. He's an engineer. And I should say Janice Miller-Young is also an engineer. And then I interviewed Jill Nelson from George Mason. She is an electrical engineer. Curtis Bennett from Cal State Long Beach is a mathematician. Brian Coppola from University of Michigan is a chemist. And last but not least, Kim Shaw, she's a physicist from Columbus State University. So they will pop in and out as we go along with their things that they had to share based on the interview questions that I asked them. So let's go ahead and jump in.
All right, so I talked to you guys about the fact that I interviewed some people to help me share this info with you. But the gist of this presentation is that I'm going to walk you through what is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and hopefully give you the tools and the information to launch a SoTL study on your own, or at least get some ideas seriously tumbling around in your head and see where that leads you. I am an assistant professor of biomedical engineering here at Mercer University. And this presentation and going to the Lilly conference where I pulled the info that's in these slides from was all sponsored by Mercer's QEP program, and I was part of the Faculty Scholars program that was led by our QEP people. So let's just do a brief rundown of what the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is. I started out this adventure not totally knowing what the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning was, and confusing it with sort of the Scholarship of Education or scholarly teaching. So let's first distinguish Scholarship of Teaching and Learning from traditional scholarship, which is those of us, particularly those of us that are in STEM, we think of scholarship often in P&T. It's defined as what we think of as research, bench research, or if you do field research, but not having to do what goes on with what's happening in our classrooms. And then Scholarship of Education, which exists. It is a newer field, but it's legitimate, and I should say pedagogy of teaching, that's been around, and that's where there's theory, and that's not what I am talking about today. So stay tuned. I'm going to talk about this side of Scholarship of Education, which is integration and application, and hopefully show you and talk you through how, in fact, you're teaching on a daily basis, and in fact, you are doing a chunk of Scholarship of Education, which is Scholarship of Teaching and Learning already. And this presentation and this talk are really aimed at STEM fields, and I want to emphasize that there's common ground in the processes that both sides of STEM or the fields of STEM use. If you guys are looking at going, the colors kind of match up, yup. The colors on the left are what we would think of as marching you through the scientific method. You've got a question that you ask, and you do some background research, and you pose a hypothesis, And then you need to design an experiment and run it and tie it back to your hypothesis. And then on the right side, my engineers that are looking at this is design method or the design process. So define the problem, again, do background research and specify the requirements. But there's this part down here that's iterative, and that's not that dissimilar from the iterative part of doing the scientific method. And so we're both, I think, engineers have their basis in science, and then the science people already work with this cycle of thinking about something in this method on a daily basis. We do it all the time, and there's just really a lot of overlap. So let's separate out scholarly teaching from the scholarship of teaching and learning. And this is where you might say the scholarship of teaching and learning is relatively new, but it's still frankly been around for those people that were early on working in it or working to define it. That was 20 years ago. So scholarly teaching, going back and forth. Again, let me make sure I acknowledge that this slide in particular was pulled out of Dr. Cox's presentation, which he adapted, that I got to see at the Lilly conference in San Diego earlier this year in February of 2020. And he kindly shared these with me. So, but scholarly teaching is examining the knowledge base for teaching and learning and what's been published, and then thinking about it. And then the other side over here, we can talk about what looks not dissimilar from the flowcharts I just showed you on the scientific method and the engineering design process, that you have a problem, but this is keyword here, I should have put it in a bold color. Learning is a problem related to learning, and then you do a lit search and you follow along. Well, they're connected in that your discussion, both your lit search and your discussion, tie back to what's already been done. And so you compare and contrast what you get with what's been done, thus giving you a discussion section of something you might publish. And then if you fill in how the cycle connects, if you're teaching and you propose a project and then you go through this cycle where you publish something, it gets added to the knowledge base. And the people that are doing what we might consider the pedagogy and the theory stuff, they're going to think about it and think about how it worked and why it worked. But meanwhile, you're still going to be you can be back in the classroom teaching and going through this iteration over here.
That flowchart that we just went through, that sounds like work. And so you ask, why would I add something else into my already busy schedule? How am I going to fit something else into the mix of teaching, research, and just a generally busy life? Well, here's something that Kim Shaw said that I thought made sense at this point in time.
I've always been a believer that no matter how good you are at something, you can always do better. And so I wanted to be thinking about ways that I could improve my teaching. And one of the things that he said really challenged me, and it still echoes today. He looked at me at one point and said, if they're not learning, are you actually teaching?
Well, Steve Freeman said,
when I came to Iowa State to coordinate the occupational safety undergraduate program here, I found myself spending a lot more time in the classroom. And as an engineer, I wanted to do continuous improvement. So I was always thinking about, well, how can I do this better?
But you say, time out, whoa, I am not an engineer, and so I don't think about quality management. That's not my thing. But it turns out that it's still very much in the wheelhouse of people that are in the STEM disciplines, and even people that aren't in the STEM disciplines that simply do research, as Kim speaks to here.
And as a scientist, we're trained to take data to be able to answer questions. So taking that next step of, okay, I'm already used to the idea of taking data. How do I design a good experiment to take good data to see if my students have learned? It was an interesting challenge.
So going back to the flowchart, the right side of the flowchart speaks to saying, okay, you start with describe a problem that's related to learning, which leads to what problem do you pick? And for me, just thinking about the classes that I taught from 2020, I have a lot of options. The list is long. So, but when I was talking to Steve, he said something that made a lot of sense, and I think sort of will help you simplify.
You know, the other advice that I give junior faculty is start small.
Yeah.
You know, pick one thing that you're struggling with in your class. Something that either you would like to do better or a topic that your students are struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
And just try to address that one thing, get a conference presentation out of it. Don't worry about a journal article right away. Just do it because you want to do a better job in the classroom, and take that little step. And then once you realize, you know, I was already doing 90% of that work anyway, I just wasn't sharing it. So now let's just figure out ways to share it.
So the next thing on the flowchart that we started with is you have to identify what your question or your problem is. And these problems or questions that often lead to SoTL studies or are the beginnings of SoTL studies usually fall into one of three overlapping categories. You've got teaching, you have learning, and you have institutional organization. And absolutely these categories overlap. I hear you thinking, you know, how could I change something that I teach without changing what my students are learning? And you are correct. Those things are going to overlap, and I'd venture to say that each of these things has multiple levels. So I want to give a couple examples, or at least an example of each, something, a question or problem that falls into each of these categories. So something that would fall under learning is that you opt to use a new tool for students that might enhance their learning in a class. And an example I give is you choose to identify a question and answer bank that students can study with, that you link them to. An example of a teaching question or problem is that you add new content to a class, and in the hope that that changes the student's behavior. Or could be a whole like new curriculum, meaning that you add courses also. So that's a little bit bigger. And then you can go institution wide, and an institutional organization type question would be, what change could you make that's bigger, that's department wide or that's university wide, that may or may not improve student learning or student success? So admittedly, those examples on that slide that we just went over are pretty vague. So let's talk about you, and specifically how you can get started on a SoTL project. That's kind of the gist of this whole thing, is giving you an introduction and the starter tools, starter pack to get you going. So I asked my SoTL interviewees what did they think was a common barrier to activation for SoTL studies, for somebody getting started on a SoTL study. And the thing that Janice Miller Young said was
methods and methodology.
Yeah.
I remember actually, do I want to say this? I remember making up my research question, actually. So I had two kind of questions that I was really interested in. One that I was most interested in, but I had no idea how I was actually going to be able to answer it. And one that I was less interested in, but a more obvious method to use. So I proposed to do this study over here because I figured it was as much a learning opportunity as it was a research opportunity. So I wanted to get my feet wet, but I also wanted it to be a success so that I could then go on and do something else afterwards.
And then Kim Shaw's advice echoed what Janice Miller-Young said.
As a faculty member, what's my research question? And then making sure that it's something that you're actually testing, but also making sure it's manageable. One of the things that I frequently remind both myself and my coworkers is you don't have to fix the whole class all at once. Because if you try and change everything all at once, you're not going to know what worked and what didn't. And it will either be a colossal success or a colossal failure. And too often you try and fix everything and one thing doesn't work. And then you view all of the changes as a failure and you give up.
And last but not least on this topic, Steve had some great advice and encouragement as well.
So I think the biggest barrier to junior faculty now is one of confidence, and convincing them that they can answer their SoTL questions with the same skills and the same techniques that they learned as graduate students to do their disciplinary research. So, we're not asking them to be pedagogical experts. We're asking them to be experts in their discipline with their students.
All right, so you've heard from them. So let's jump back into the presentation. And fair warning, the next slide is prompts to get you thinking. So if you don't already have a pen and paper, or you've got your taking notes, hit pause in the video and go grab some pen and paper. And of course, the video will be here when you get back. Pen and paper in hand, ready to go? All right, so we've got prompts for SoTL Research questions. Here's where these are just options that should potentially spark ideas in your mind. And again, I think more likely is that these are going to be a real baseline and not to be confused with the baseline we talk about later for you throwing out ideas. And I think we all have lots of ideas when we're really out there to try to teach well and help our students learn. So idea number one, the concept in this course that gives my students the most trouble is, what's the most challenging thing semester after semester for your students in a particular class? I like this one. The misconception that most limits my students is. And this one may even lend itself to, okay, maybe you don't know what the misconception is. So maybe you need to find out what the misconception is and see what effects, and then chase it, see what effects it's having. An aspect of teaching that I perpetually have difficulties with is, so this could be a struggle with talking at the board while you're writing something up. So potentially switching up your teaching modality or the tools that you're using. Or this could come out of student evals. Maybe there's something that pops up repeatedly one semester that students point out. Or multiple semesters in a row, students are pointing something out. I personally have seen that happen with my student evals. And then here's one where there's a distinction, the difference between the students that get it, your A students and the students that don't and the students that struggle with it. What is it? And if you think about what it is there something you can change that might help the students that aren't getting it? And then the lovely, more philosophical one. If you had all the time in the world, I would try to figure out, what would you try to figure out and why? So that's giving you some food for thought. And hopefully you've got a question or two set out. And so now you've got the lit search that is ahead of you. You need to do the background and gather the information on, let's put it this way, who's done what already and how well did it work for them. And there are a couple tools to start off with that I want to highlight that are excellent resources. I'm going to talk about those in just a second, but let's just say that you have two tact, and those are not dissimilar from you doing a background search in traditional scholarship or traditional research. You can go and use for me, when I'm doing my bench research, I'm doing a PubMed.gov search, or somebody may be doing an IEEE search, and you can do a search for SoTL studies not in the same way. Or you can do a specific, you can target a specific journal if you know your work is going to fall into a certain realm of studies. And that's where potentially these two resources may come into play.
Okay, everybody, so you've got to conduct a lit search. Not at all unlike you would conduct a lit search to generate the background that you need for what we would consider classical or classic traditional research. And so two resources that I'm going to point you to. The first is the Kennesaw State University page. That's their teaching journals directory that you can see here. It is extensive. The list is long, and it's alphabetical, and you can organize it and narrow it down by your discipline. Biological science, if you wanted to. Engineering is in there, and as well, if you just pick sciences, then you kind of get a mix of both. But if I scroll down, I know it's got a blank screen there, but if I get to the bottom, you can see I'm on page, I'm only to the B's, and I have 9 pages left to go. So you get a sense of how many journals they are linking you to through this page. There's other resources on the page as well that you can potentially look through, but specifically I wanted to highlight this page because it gives you the link to the journals. Absolutely, if you don't want to use this resource and you want to do what you would consider, go to Google Scholar or go to one of the other search engines for manuscripts, you can do your lit search that way. But you can also search specific journals that may be more targeted in the area that you are interested in. All right, the other page that I want to highlight for you guys is the University of Central Florida's page. That's their SoTL Resources page. This one has some subject areas that are focused under the SoTL umbrella. And so you have funding in here, but you also have sources of data, and you have here, which is what I direct you to. They have a teaching journals directory, and they also, which may come in handy once you have your study done, a teaching conferences directory. So both may serve you if you are ultimately end up having a study completed. And again, the journals on this list are probably going to have overlap with the journals that you saw on the other page from Kennesaw State, but they might have something different for you.
Okay, so I showed you those two great resources online that you can use as part of gathering your background information. But same as you do for traditional research, in terms of a traditional study and subsequent publication, you gather your background information, and Mercer, we have a great set of students. So let's say you have a SoTL research question and you need to teach and you want your students to learn, but you have limited time. Okay, here's where Brian Coppola talked about something that they do at the University of Michigan that he's been implementing at the chemistry department up there for a number of years. So let's hear what he had to say.
Yeah, the only good idea I possibly ever had was, can that research group model where faculty are idea drivers and they build groups of people who get a training in that area by forming a team that works so well in the development of scholarship and research, could that also not work for the development of scholarship and teaching? If you have an idea about teaching, why not put together a team? What team? The students who are naturally inclined to be thinking about academic careers in the future, whether they're undergraduates, graduate students, or postdocs. So we have basically developed a research group model. And that means that the driver here isn't the interest of the students. The driver here is that we've created an infrastructure of support that allows faculty members to pursue their ideas in education the same way they pursue their ideas in research. And I have yet to see a new faculty member come onto campus who didn't want to get involved in education. It's just that they didn't know how without sacrificing so much of their own time.
Right. Yeah. I've had with my undergrads in my lab, I've had conversations with them about, this is what I was thinking about a freshman design class. I was thinking about making this change to the class. How would the students respond to it? And they're almost your initial survey group.
Yeah.
Sounding board. Would you do this? And sometimes they're like, that's bad.
Yeah.
We have awesome students, and many of them want to be involved. They want to be involved in lab, and they want to be involved as freshmen and sophomores. Sometimes they don't have the technical skills yet or the knowledge for you to really turn them loose in lab. But it helps to develop a rapport with them and get involved with them early on. So here's my little spiel for overseeing the research students is this is an area, food for thought. If you bring them on board as freshman and sophomore, you could potentially have them working on this area of research. You could have them working on a SoTL project. You could have them working on gathering background for your studies. And it could be for your lit search for your traditional research, but they could also just as well be doing lit search for SoTL studies. And you might find that they have interesting contributions to make. All right, you have done your lit search, check. It's done, and you have generated enough information, or not generated enough information, but covered enough background to know that what you're looking at is new, it's needed, it's interesting. And so the question and problem you're going to work on is a fantastic question, and it's going to rock the world, right? Take a deep breath. I just want to point out and make sure that you keep in mind that you take bites that are manageable, okay? So harken back to what we saw a little earlier from my interviewees. But the next 3 steps that are bracketed in green here, they really do go hand in hand. And the first one is this, designing your project is propose a solution. And when you're proposing a solution, you're deciding what exactly are you going to do? What actions are you going to take? And remember that the question or problem that you've come up with is your why. So for every action that you have, it should logically connect back to that problem. And just remember, start small. Pick 1 or 2 actions that you're going to do, 1 or 2 changes that you're going to make. And then next, what can you use as your baseline? So let's keep in mind that the baseline is what I think about in a regular bench study as my control or my untreated sample. It's what you're going to compare at post change to. And think about when that collection is going to happen. And let's talk for a minute about how SoTL differs from traditional research here. All right, so when we get to the baseline and assessment stage, here's where SoTL is slightly different than many of the traditional research experiments, okay? If you want to test a computer algorithm that predicts traffic flow, there are no computers involved, or I should say, pardon me, there aren't any humans involved that are the test subjects, okay? The computer's crunching numbers. Or if you want to test how quickly a metal composite, the strength of it fails when it's exposed to sunshine, UV exposure. Again, no humans involved in that test. But if I'm asking questions that are related to student learning and effectiveness of my teaching, there's a good chance that the answer to the question of does it involve humans is yes, it involves humans. Okay, so why am I belaboring the answer to does it involve humans? And if the answer is yes, well, if your answer is yes, then that translates to it is going to involve you needing study approval that comes from Mercer's IRB. And that lends itself to something that Kim said. So let's hear what she said.
The other thing that makes things challenging sometimes is getting IRB approval. And that varies wildly from institution to institution, how easy or how difficult it is in order to get that done.
Okay, and then that leads me to, here's where I get to do an advertisement for my fellow QEP faculty scholar, Amy Nichols-Bulow. She has put together an excellent resource on all things IRB. Whatever you want to know, she's put it together in a resource for you that is all specifically about Mercer's IRB and IRB processes. And the link to that resource that Amy has generated is also going to be found on Mercer's QEP page. Okay, so check that out if you have IRB questions. And as well, another resource in that area, just quick name drop that you might want to reach out to, is Mercer's Director of Research Compliance, and that's Ava Chambliss-Richardson, and she also will field questions if you have any. Okay, so we have covered that SoTL and the fact that it involves people and humans, your students and their thoughts and output makes it different than traditional bench research, and it involves the IRB. But let's talk about examples of what can be baseline data in these studies. You can take outcomes from a previous class that you've taught or a previous time that you have taught that particular class. So this can be grades, it can be student work, and there's all varieties of that, work, tests, essays. And then you can also look at, did the students stay in the class or did the students stay on in your degree program? And then here's one that gets used quite a lot, I think, in SoTL. You'll see it, that on the first day of class when students walk in, they take a survey. And that survey may be on their attitudes about the class, but it also, in all likelihood, it can be a knowledge survey. What do you know when you walk in the door? And then a control group would be considered either you're teaching 2 sections of the class and you are executing the change in only one of those sections, or you're teaching a section and making a change, and you know that the class is taught with the same content and same timeline by another faculty member, and that can be your control group as well. So that you've got 2 classes running. And then a follow on to what do you decide is going to be your baseline are next determining what are going to be your choice of how you're going to assess. Did my change work? How effective was my change in altering how much my students learned or how they felt about a topic, that kind of thing. And there's several, so we're going to do them 2 by 2. You can do pre and post surveys of their reactions to stuff. And so the one on the left, pre and post surveys there, more like maybe pre and post evaluations. On the right, this is where we're saying, can you do this problem or can you do this task? And could they do it when they started and could they do it when they finished? Again, retention comes up. Do your students persist? And then reflections in a journal. And that would be you as the instructor keeping a journal and writing down how that class goes, how your interactions with students are going, And in the SoTL world, that counts as data. It can be a significant contribution to the data set for a study. You can, I think this one is interesting for either in a almost any CLA class, but it came to my attention at the Lilly conference. I had students discuss journal articles, scientific studies in class, but I hadn't thought about putting it up and then asking them to discuss features amongst themselves, but doing it via message board. And so an option is, a way to assess, do you see an increase in how many comments they make? And Canvas also is useful, and this got brought up during my interviews. Canvas sort of non-invasively can track how long a student is logged in and working on something, or how many times they interact with a piece of your course. And that can be helpful. And then on your right, you've got improvements that follow. And when I say SoTL study course, so do students perform better in a course that comes after the class that you made the change in? So for example, there's if you've got solid mechanics 1 and solid mechanics 2, and they do better in solid mechanics 2, and possibly that could be attributed to a change you made in solid mechanics 1. That's what I'm getting at in the right pentagon. And then last, student evaluations of teaching absolutely can be a means of assessment. And then portfolios of students' work. This can be a project that they complete. This can be something that they build. This can be for art. It's certainly, they almost always are generating a portfolio. Or students writing. Those are all examples of where we've got portfolios of students' work. And so essentially that's your SoTL components in a nutshell. Let's fast forward a little bit to now you have data. You had your baseline, and then you've got the follow-on assessment data for everything that you've been working on. Okay, so you have that data, and this is a bit of advice I think that comes with research in general, which is essentially, before you decide to get everything fully written up, decide where you're going to publish. And just to reiterate that, here's something that Curtis Bennett said.
And that's one of the things to know before you write it up. Where are you planning to publish? I mean, this is something that I tell math researchers, right? Is when you're going to be writing a research article, don't write the article and then think about where it's going to get published. Think about where it's going to get published and write the article to fit that venue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't always do that, but that's the better way to do it. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to come back and have to rewrite.
All right, so you've heard back and forth from some of my interviewees and what they had to say on SoTL and how it's played into their careers a little bit. And I also asked them, what's a piece of advice, what's a nugget that you would give to faculty members, either faculty members that want to get started in SoTL, that their career is established, or junior faculty members. And so here's kind of a montage of the advice that they suggested when I asked them that question.
If I had to take $1, I'd put all 99 cents of it on the value of collaborations, especially when people don't have the background, which I didn't.
Find help. Like get to conferences, start reading stuff. Like I said, I made friends with the people in the teaching center who had education backgrounds, and I learned from them. I worked with them and learned from them. Whatever you can find to help support you in your learning, go out and grab it.
Number one, find people to work with. I think that, it doesn't have to be directly, but I think having a community of SoTL scholars is really valuable. And if you're trying to do it all solo, it's a lot harder.
It's super valuable to get collaborators, either mentors who are already doing it in an area like yours, or people in other fields, right? Whether that's education or social science of some sort, other social sciences of some sort too, to help guide you, but also, you know, to fill in the gaps. You have expertise that you bring to it because you understand the pedagogy that the students are, right, what the content is that the students are trying to learn and what the applications are, and they bring different skills or potentially mentoring from the other side of having done it.
That is a wrap for the chunk of information I wanted to deliver to you guys today about SoTL, and just hopefully giving you the tools and topics that you want to think about if you're interested in getting a SoTL study started. And just a reminder, Dr. Susan Cadoni over at Mercer's Center for Teaching and Learning, she can be an excellent sounding board when you're getting started or during the process of a study. And of course, I'm happy to help. I'm a novice, but I'm happy to help. And I just want to encourage you that this is something that I think we have a ton of opportunities because of the great faculty and great students we have at Mercer. We have opportunities to run some pretty interesting SoTL studies. So hopefully I will hear from you, or maybe you'll be knocking on Susan's door, but good luck with anything you get going.